Okay, so we're in James chapter 3, and kind of like last week, main point of this section is going to be watch your mouth. So if we don't get anything else, I mean, this just sounds like my mom before the backhand comes. Watch your mouth, right? So watch your mouth is going to be the big section for what we're looking at here. In our previous section, we were looking at what biblical faith is not and what biblical faith is. Do you remember we were really seeing where James was making it clear that biblical faith is not just a verbal profession. Biblical faith is not just a list of beliefs, but it's actually things that you can see, and it's fruit that you can see in people's lives. And so along those same lines, James is really going to focus on the tongue and our mouths and our speech. The way that we speak and how we use our mouths is a profession of if our faith is biblical faith or if it's just faith with the quotation marks from last week. So let's read the first 8 verses together, please. First 8 verses. And the overall main point is going to be watch your mouth. Watch your mouth. So verse 1. Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. Now, if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body, and sets on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beasts and birds, of reptiles, of creatures of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. Wow, I mean, that's an intense section, all talking about the tongue, isn't it? I think actually, Evan, was it like a year ago you did an invitation on this section of verses? Yeah, I remembered that. It's important. So you can teach class tonight. It would be great. Well, let's go back to verse 1 here. The overall point here is very clearly watch your mouth, because your tongue is powerful. The words that we speak are very important. They can be useful, they can be good, but they can also be very, very destructive from what we just read. In verse 1, he says, let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. One of the things I think is important about this time period is that a lot of people likely couldn't read in this time period. So whoever the teacher is, teachers are important today, aren't they? But if you can't read, how important are your teachers? I mean, so much more important than teachers today. And it's a huge blessing for teachers to have people who can read, who challenge you, who question the things that you say and are trying to make sure that what you're saying is more accurate. So in this time period where maybe a lot of people can't read, your words as a teacher, especially of the things of God, oh wow. You want to talk about some weight. You want to talk about some responsibility. There's a lot of responsibility there because there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of faith. There's a lot of dependence maybe on some teachers in that time period that, by the way, probably shouldn't be true for us today with all the access and availability that we have. But because of that, he says, let not many of you become teachers. There's a stricter judgment happening here. One of the things I really want to emphasize on this, it's not necessarily just becoming teachers. I feel like sometimes in local congregations, maybe we could pull this verse out and be like, that's why I don't teach Bible class, because James said it. Probably not why you don't teach Bible class. But anyway, the warning here is really to emphasize don't become a teacher for the wrong reasons. Because the words that you're going to be speaking are going to be very, very important. Don't do it for any of these wrong reasons. There's weight, there's responsibility, and there's a stricter judgment. What are we talking about here that teachers get stricter judgment? What do you think?
I think part of what comes out of what you're talking about, this particular section talking about teachers is kind of unique because the idea of a teacher, through the biblical culture, was a lot more than just what he said. And so this particular section is kind of unique because it is focusing on what the teacher is saying. So the idea there of the stricter judgment is what your example what they're seeing,
Yeah.
what message they're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Eddie was just saying that from the example that a teacher sets, and maybe the words and the interpretations that you set forth, that's really going to be a big deal for the people who hear. And maybe what they see, what they hear from you, especially if, I'm really glad you mentioned this, what they see from you, not just the words. Because what section did we just finish in James chapter 2? What was the big thing in James chapter 2? I heard something. Faith, yes? Yes, you demonstrate your faith by your works. And so here comes this teacher who says all the right things, professes all the right things, has the list of the things you're supposed to believe completely right, and yet they don't do what they profess. Well, we got to talk about that. There should be things that you should see in this person's life. And especially if what they're saying is not following their actions. I think that's more along the lines of what this severe penalty or stricter judgment is. Because if we're talking about eternal judgment, the way that some people might take this, is there, maybe we say this, is there a special place in judgment for people who used to be teachers that's different for anybody else in the judgment? I don't think so. And so I don't think we're talking about necessarily a stricter judgment from God eternally if you were a teacher versus if you were not a teacher. But maybe it has more to do with when you're a teacher, there's more intense scrutiny that you face that other people don't face. There's more of a responsibility on a teacher to live it out than maybe somebody who's not a teacher, because they're professing these things and you've got to back it up. So maybe this more stricter judgment, whatever grammar that is, maybe it's more so because of what you face from other people. And it's not a bad thing. It's really not. It's just the reality of the situation. And just like in chapter 2 and verse 13, you will be judged with the same measure that you judge, essentially. Judgment will be merciless to those who show no mercy. And if you're a teacher teaching these things and you show no mercy, well, there might be a stricter judgment coming your way. Did somebody want to say something? I thought I saw a hand up. Yes, sir.
The idea that it's like, this is going to be a paraphrase. If you know what's the right thing to do, you're going to do it. That's the same way the teacher should know. And so they do or don't do it. Maybe it's something like that.
Yeah, and that's coming up in James 2. For the one who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, for him it's sin. Yes, sir?
Jesus told his disciples that when a disciple is fully trained, he will be just like his teacher. Not that he will have memorized everything his teacher taught him, but he will be just like his teacher. So if your example is bad, then that means two people are following that example, not just you, but the one that you're teaching.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the idea here of why that judgment is stricter. It has a greater responsibility.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, much greater responsibility. Somebody else have something? I thought I saw a hand. Okay, yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about many times in the Old Testament, the shepherds came under strict scrutiny from God because they were supposed to be the ones who were not only looking out for the flock, but also guiding the flock.
Yeah.
And so, you kind of take that over to the New Testament, what we just read a few weeks ago in Hebrews 13, talking about submit to your leaders, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. So it seems like if someone is given charge over someone or special, then that is going to be held accountable. That's going to be part of that judgment. Whether it's a different type of judgment or not, that is going to be at least part of it.
Yeah.
It seems to be.
Yeah, absolutely. You're mentioning the shepherds of the Old Testament, the leaders, the elders, and sadly a lot of times the priests were being called out for not leading the people the way they should. And these are the very people who should know more, but they weren't living it out. And so there's definitely more responsibility, more of a burden, stricter judgment on those people. Anything else here? Okay. Just because we are talking about the tongue, we are talking about the words that a teacher says here, but it's not just teachers that are mentioned here. And what's so fascinating about this, that what makes the teacher's position so difficult is that the very instrument that a teacher uses, the tongue, to express the things of the Lord, what does it say in verse 2? Is that it's one of the hardest things to control. And so it's crazy. So in verse 2, we all stumble in many ways. Amen to that, anybody? We all stumble in many ways. if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. So if you control your tongue, you control your life. And it is a difficult thing to harness, and so many things wrong can happen from it. And we get these just wonderful illustrations of this in verses, 3 and 4? Yeah, 3, 4, and 5 there. Just great illustrations. We just had the Derby. So, I mean, those are powerful, I almost said engines. They're basically engines. These are powerful creatures. And if they really wanted to, couldn't they just buck those little guys off and trample them? They could do it like that. But you've got these little things in their mouths, and they can get them to do exactly what they want them to do. They've had all this training, whatever. Very little, but controls this really powerful beast. And it's a really crazy thing. Just like these ships, you've got these great ships, huge. I mean, you can put thousands and thousands of pounds. I wish I read it, this was years ago, but something about an aircraft carrier, just how many people can be on an aircraft carrier and all the equipment that can be on there, just tons and tons and tons of pounds. And you know what moves that thing? This little thing in the back, little rudder in the back, controls the directions. And so the tongue, verse 5, is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts great things. It's small, but wow, it's powerful. The tongue, the words, the way that we speak is so, so powerful. Any thoughts on that before we keep going a little bit? Yes, sir.
I love looking all the way back to creation, and that's how God put this into existence and set all the energy in motion was through His words, and as like we've talked about before, but that's His ruach, His breath. And I love that it's an overlap of the idea of pneuma or ruach is it can mean spirit or will, and it can mean breath, what you externalize, and like linking those two as a concept. When you speak into existence, all of your spirit and will that's going on inside, it's like this externalization of it, and it's almost like a bridge of those two concepts. And it's really interesting to think, like, God showed us how powerful it is from day one, and there's some sort of relationship there of, when I let my spirit into the world, not my spirit is in the spirit that keeps me alive, the spirit is in like my will. When I show that, I speak it into existence, it better be good.
Yeah, words are powerful. Creation is just a perfect example of that. God's spoken words create everything. And on that, there's so many other ways we could go with that, but about how just important words are, and especially when you think about God. Every single word that God says is true. Every single word that God says is necessary and is good and is useful and has purpose. But that's not true of us, is it? We've got plenty of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. We've got plenty of words that we'd like to take back because they're not good. We've got plenty of words that really don't mean anything. We've got words that are not useful sometimes, but that's not the way it is with God. That's really a fascinating thing. Anyway, anybody else? Or keep going here? Okay. Well, the tongue is a small part of the body. It boasts of great things. It's extremely powerful. And because it's so powerful, it can also be extremely destructive. And so at the end of verse 5, see how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. Doug and Josanne aren't here tonight, but they recently, probably within the past year, they sold their home in California. And one of the reasons it was really hard for them to sell their home in California was all those fires that were going on over there. And so you've got just perfect setup for this massive forest fire to start. What does it take for it to really kick off? Little spark, just a little spark. That's all that's needed. And then, boom, entire forest, $1 million homes destroyed so quickly and so powerfully. And the tongue is being used, or the tongue is being alluded to with that same kind of imagery. It just takes a little spark. It doesn't take much, but you can set an entire forest aflame. And verse 6 is so intense. Verse 6 is extremely intense. The tongue is a fire. It's the very world of iniquity. Different translations say different things there. Oh, the world of evil, the world of iniquity. And where is it? It's within our own bodies. It's within our own bodies and can defile the entire body. It sets on fire the course of our entire lives. And what does it say the source of that fire is at the end of verse 6? Hell. Gehenna is literally the word there. The place of refuse where child sacrifice used to be, where all kinds of just trash heap on fire is, and judgment. That's the source of the evil that our tongues can do and the damage that our tongues can do. It's really intense. And Jesus said in Matthew 15, he says something along the lines of, it's not what goes into a man that defiles a person. What does he say defiles a person in Matthew 15? Do you remember? Yeah, it's what comes out, and specifically the words that come out. And let's actually take a look at that really quick. Matthew 15. Let's see. Matthew 15, that was down in verse 11. But then look down at verse 18. So Matthew 15, down in verse 18. And as usual, Jesus gets to the heart of the matter, and in this passage, I mean literally the heart of the matter. Matthew 15, look at verse 18. But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders. And he says, these are the things which defile the man, but to eat with unwashed hands doesn't defile the man. That was what was going on there. So what comes out of a person's mouth usually indicates where their heart is. And so he's saying that's what defiles people there. And so where in verse 7 and 8, back in James chapter 3, in verses 7 and 8, we were just talking about those little bridles that can hold these mighty beasts at bay, and the tiny rudder that can move these massive ships. In verse 7, he says, every species of beasts and birds and reptiles, creatures of the sea, everything's tamed. Everything's been tamed by mankind. You know, you can go to, what's that thing called? There was a documentary about it. Whales. There's some place in Florida you can go see shows. I don't even know what it's called. I'm thinking Wally World, but I know it's not that. SeaWorld, there we go. You can go to SeaWorld and watch those things do whatever they can train them to do. You can go to the Derby and see these amazing beasts do exactly what they want them to do. You can go to the dog shows, you can do all that stuff. But he says, verse 8, no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. Whew. It's intense. I mean, this is very serious. And by the way, we've talked about how James is very similar to Proverbs and very similar to a lot of Jesus' teachings, especially Sermon on the Mount. I highly encourage you, go to the book of Proverbs and see how many times speaking and things of the tongue show up in Proverbs, because it's just all the time. So no one can tame the tongue. And does that mean just full blank stop? No one can tame the tongue? Ever? Or what do we think that means?
I think it means what it says it means, which is just that it's very difficult.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you. And maybe, because of what we're talking about, if you try and do it on your own, your results may vary. Yeah, I think it's taking a lot more than just our own selves to do this. Let's see. Do I want to talk about that now? Let's wait. Let's hold off on that. All right, anything else in verses 1 through 8 before we keep going? Verses 9 through 12? Yes, sir.
I think it says that we can't tame our mouth, but I think it's like an intentional thing that we have to focus on every day. I almost view it as like a warning. It's like, this is so hard to do and near impossible, but like, you need to focus on this intentionally. Going back to like your words flowing from your heart, the whole Proverbs where it talks about guarding your heart for everything that flows from it. Like, it's what we're putting into our bodies as well as what's going to come out. So like what we're surrounding ourselves with, what we're looking at and listening to on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult to tame the tongue and the seriousness of the words. And so if Jesus says that comes from your heart, you better guard what goes into your heart. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, anything else here? Okay, let's read verses 9 through 12, because I think this really pairs well with what he just said in chapter 2 about, well, I say that I have faith, but then nothing else backs that up. You can say anything you want, you can have all the right beliefs, but if everything else doesn't back it up, then it means nothing. It's faith and not faith. If you couldn't see what I just did, that's not real faith, and then there's real faith. So verses 9 through 12, let's read these. He says, with it, we're still talking about the tongue, with the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be this way. Does a fountain send out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Nor can salt water produce fresh. So there can be this inconsistency with your profession of my faith in the Lord versus the fruit of my life, and literally here, the fruit of my lips. And I really appreciate verses 9 and 10. We can bless God and then immediately curse people made in his image. From the same mouth come blessings and cursings. And in verse 10, I really love how James just says it outright. He says, my brethren, these things ought not to be so. You know, sometimes we can kind of skirt around issues and be like, well, it wasn't very nice the way you talked to that person. He's like, my brethren, these things ought not to be so. And I really appreciate that because I've got a thick skull. I don't know about anybody else, but I need that. I need that a lot of the time. Verse 11 and 12, you get these great illustrations. James is great at these illustrations. He says, a spring, it doesn't produce two different kinds of water in the same spring. You don't get fresh water and bitter, or maybe salt water there. It's either going to be a fresh spring, or it's going to be a bitter one, or it's going to be a salt water spring. You don't get both out of the same one. That doesn't make sense. You don't see that out there. And then same thing, he's like, okay, so you've got this fig tree making olives? That's not what that is. Or this olive vine, you're not going to get figs off of that. That just doesn't make sense. That's not the way that these fruit work. And then you can't get salt water can't produce fresh water. So it's this exactly what we saw in chapter 2, where you've got this profession of, let's just take this whole fig tree thing a little too far, shall we? So I'm a fig tree, and I produce figs, and I love figs, and figs are the source of my life, and blah, 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 blah. And here comes these olives. You just proved to me figs are not your life, and figs are not everything you're about. Maybe you've got this olive vine. I know I'm taking these illustrations too far. But you got this olive vine. It's like, I love olives. Everything in my life centers around olives. These figs start popping out. Okay, you've just proven to me that olives are not what your life is about. Salt water is like, man, I love salt water. Salt water is my life. I center everything in my life around salt water. And out comes this fresh water. Well, you've just proven to me that your life doesn't revolve around salt water. Do you see the absurdity of these images? And so you get this whole, I really appreciate this because I'm very open about this. I used to swear like a sailor. I used to cuss like a sailor, used to use profanity every other word. And what that professes is, if on Sunday and Wednesday, I'm coming into a church building, I'm like, oh, I love the Lord. The Lord is the center of my life. Everything in my life centers around Jesus Christ. And then every other word, once I leave the building, whew, you guys got lucky on that one. I'm just kidding. I'm going to keep talking. So if every other word, as soon as I leave this building, is profanity, I am proving that Jesus is not the center of my life. And so that's what he's saying here. There's an inconsistency with my profession of faith versus literally the fruit of my lips. Oh, that's hard for me. Anybody else feel that? I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And so Jesus actually says, let's look at this one really quick. Matthew chapter 12, please. Just so you know, I'm preaching to myself more than anybody in the room. Don't think I'm thinking about anybody but myself right now. Matthew chapter 12, and let's look down at verses 36 and 37. Matthew 12, 36 and 37. If I ever do that series on things I wish Jesus never said, this would probably be one of them. Matthew 12, 36 and 37. He says, I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they shall give an accounting for it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. That's tough, isn't it? That's tough. But that's also the reality of if we're making a profession of faith and our life doesn't line up with it, we are proving that our profession of faith is not biblical faith, but it's faith. It's that faith from chapter 2. Okay. And so, with that, it's not just profanity, because we got to talk a little bit about some of the tongue things really quick. There's stuff over here. You produce what you are. There's all kinds of stuff. But I just want to make it really real. Has anybody in here on a Sunday or a Wednesday? I was just talking to Eddie about this in the bathroom right before class. Anybody on a Sunday or a Wednesday, you're here, you're worshiping, you're singing the songs, you're praying the prayers, and then you get in your car, and somebody cuts you off in traffic. I cannot be the only one that's done that. Right? It happens. And we're doing the exact thing that's being written about here in James chapter 3. Or maybe we sing the songs, we pray the prayers, I preach a sermon on watch your mouth. And then we go to a restaurant right after and we're saying awful things to the waiter or the server or the host or whoever at a restaurant. We've just proved that everything that we were professing over here is not what we're centered around. I thought that was mine. Okay. I was like, I didn't know I said 2. So it's really important that we watch our mouth, and it's an indicator of spiritual immaturity, is what it is. Yes, sir.
And that's what he talks about here in verse 9, the contrast between blessing God and cursing man that God made.
Yes.
So it's you're trying to say God is wonderful, yet that which God made is horrible.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't, that can't work.
It doesn't line up. It's cognitive dissonance. And on that, let me do this really quick. First of all, just think about this for yourself. Where is it that you are most likely to speak wrongly? Because I guarantee there's areas where you don't have any problems with your words. And maybe you don't have any problems with your words. God bless you. You know, that's not an area that you struggle with. Great. There are others of us, including me, who you struggle with this. So please just be a little empathetic on it. But where are you most likely to speak wrongly? Because I doubt it's in the church building. I doubt that, just because of the way that we're socialized and whatnot. But maybe once you get in your car, that's one of mine, I'll tell you. Maybe it's once you get home with your spouse, or maybe when you're at home with your kids, or maybe it's at work with your coworkers, or maybe it's, I don't know. I can't think of anything else right now. But where is it for you? But then, on this one, and what Eddie was talking about, how consistent is your speech from this building to other areas? This is just a building, and sometimes I think we get confused and think that this is the temple of God, when the temples of God are the people. And so this building means nothing. And the way we should speak nicely in this building, so please don't start cussing at me. We should speak nicely in this building, but this is not the temple. You all are the temple. And every person out there has, if they're not a temple right now, they can be, but they were made in the image of God. And the way that we speak to them really does matter. Okay, any thoughts on that? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to point out in Matthew, when, right before that, he says in verse 35, the good person out of his good treasures brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasures brings forth evil. So in my mind, that's a really evil person. And is James here? I know he does seem to be speaking to us. But like at what level? How much do we beat ourselves up over, somebody cutting us off in traffic? Is that something that we continue to work on? Absolutely. Why? Because we have a good spirit, right? So we're constantly disciplining ourselves, trying to improve ourselves. So, it's not something that we have to worry about Gehenna.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I've got to do better. Mm-hmm. And you know what? That may happen 500 times before I actually get better.
Yeah.
And it just takes time, prayer, and work to overcome some of those things that we have allowed to overtake our lives for a while.
Yeah.
We did it for a season, and it's going to take maybe a few seasons to get out of it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And that's a really important distinction that we're going to come back to in a little bit too. Because specifically back there in Matthew 12, he's talking about false prophets. And he says, you will know them by their fruits. So it's going to be the fruits of their lives. You're going to know, okay, this person isn't who they profess to be. And so that's a really important distinction. I'm glad you made that. Yes, sir. Really quick, and then we got to move on.
I love the word you used to use the word overtake, because I think that is what happens sometimes where we feel overrun by something, and then that provokes something out of us that usually ends up in words that we don't like using.
Yeah.
And to me, it harkens back to Romans 5, where it takes the count it all joy one step further, and it says trials to endurance, and then endurance because it produces character.
Yeah.
And so if we're going back to the earlier James, like maybe these trials are building endurance because it's building a character within us that can withstand and isn't overtaken as easily.
Yeah, sure. Is it on this?
Actually, it's moving forward.
All right, my guy. All right.
In the next section, he talks about having bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in
Yes.
the heart. And I think that touches very very much on what she was talking about, that it's not just the, the quick moment of being upset about something, but it is having this pattern of having bitter jealousy, ambition, I'm the most important.
Yeah.
That is where James is talking about your tongue reveals what's really in your heart.
Yeah, I appreciate that because it does move us forward very well. Your tongue shows where your heart is. You produce the fruit of the tree that you are. And so that tree, let's just use that illustration for a second, has to be fed by something. And what you're feeding that tree will indicate what kind of tree you're going to be, good or bad. And so spiritually speaking, there is a wisdom that us as trees should be feeding from that will produce good fruit. But there's another kind of wisdom that we can feed on and is going to produce bad fruit. And that's exactly where we go next. And it's the source of wisdom. The source of the wisdom that you are imbibing, what comes into your heart, will affect what comes out of your mouth and the kind of fruit that you produce. We are running out of time. This is horrible. Okay, look at verse 13 with me, please. Let's read 13 through, did I say 18? I don't think there is an 18. Yes, there is. Okay, here we go. Verse 13. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly. I really like the translation unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there's disorder and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Now I'll just say, I don't think it's an accident at all that James talks about earthly wisdom contrasted with the wisdom from above in this section. It really follows closely what we saw Jesus say in Matthew 15 and back in Matthew chapter 12. Just basically, you're going to know them by their fruits. If it's a good tree, it's going to produce good fruits. If it's a bad tree, they're going to produce bad fruits. And it's what proceeds out of a man's mouth that defiles him. And he mentions that whole awful list. But it also comes after chapter 1, which is pray for wisdom, and God will give it to you. Pray for wisdom, God will give it to you as you face these trials. Don't show partiality based on your own standards or favoritism on your own standards. And your life, including your words, has to demonstrate your profession of faith. It's not just a list of things that you believe in. Your life has to show it. And so James is showing this is what true wisdom is and the source of all those things versus not true wisdom and not the source of all those good things. So verse 13, he says, who among you is wise and understanding? It's almost like a challenging kind of question. Who is wise? Well, you're going to show it by your life, by your good deeds. Was that the first one? Okay, let's go. We got a little bit. Verse 14, this is in contrast with those rotten fruits. There's rotten fruit that comes from a rotten tree, and that is bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, arrogance, lying against the truth. And really, we've been talking about this a lot tonight. One way to identify where someone's heart is to see their fruits and see what makes them mad. I mean, we're talking about bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. Why are they mad in bitter jealousy and selfish ambition?
They're the center of their own world.
Yes, they're the center of their own world. I don't care what happens to you. This is what happened to me. Let's talk about me for a minute. This is about me. That's showing fruit. That's showing things in their life, and that shows you that's not the wisdom that comes from above. That's this earthly, unspiritual, demonic even wisdom here. Where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, I really like it. It says there's disorder and there's every evil thing, every evil practice. When you start seeing all these bad things happen, when you start seeing all this bad fruit on display, that's your sign. I mean, that's your indicator of what the source of wisdom is for whatever is going on there. And the contrast here just couldn't be any bigger. Couldn't be any bigger. The wisdom from above is, just reading these words, you want to read it different. Pure, peaceable, gentle, reasonable. I really like reasonable. Being open for reason, being a reasonable person. And this is the opposite of jealousy, selfish ambition, that in the early part of chapter 4, if you just want to glance down there, you're going to see quarrels, you're going to see conflicts, you're going to see murder, lust, envy. So all these things that are caused by the wrong source of wisdom, you don't see those when it's the wisdom from above. So it just couldn't be any more different. Couldn't be any more different. And peace, peace is so underrated. Peace is so underrated. Peace is so important. And so, man, there's so many things we could talk about, but there's a lot like the Beatitudes here. I want to make it really practical in the last couple minutes. So, number one, what is your default wisdom? I'm not saying this is your wisdom, okay? Because whatever. What's your default? What's your knee-jerk reaction? What's your knee-jerk source for all of your stuff? And especially when you're upset. There's a couple of questions that I read somebody else wrote, so I didn't come up with this, but I thought it was really good. Do you default to needing to defend yourself? Do you default to being in competition with other people around you? Do you default to needing to be right in every conversation? And he was like, those answers to that question might tell you what your source of wisdom is. And I just thought that was really helpful for me. And so then, on that too, let's do a little fruit inspection in your life. Do a fruit inspection. You know when you go to the grocery store, Caitlin tells me to go get strawberries, and I open this thing, there's 40 billion strawberry boxes here, and I'm like, oh, you know what I'm talking about. You and 5 other ladies are there. All right, not that one. Why? There's rotten fruit in there. Or there's one that isn't looking very good that's going to affect the other ones. So do a little fruit inspection here with me and evaluate the fruit in your life. And even in specific categories here. So our speech, we talked a lot about the words that we speak. Are you more critical or competitive with people when you speak? Or are you more encouraging? Or are you open to reason? Are you peaceable? As we just saw the 2 different wisdoms here. And then I tried to think about another way to say this. This isn't going to be a good way. But in your relationships with other people, whether this be your spouse, your kids, your other family member, co-workers, whoever you're thinking of right now in your relationships with other people, are my relationships full of peace, purity, gentleness, reasonableness, mercy, or is there just constant tension, constant strife, constant disorder? Because that might be indicating the source of the wisdom. And then, on that too, in just our personal attitudes, maybe nobody else can see this part of us. I don't know. But is there pure, unwavering, maybe contentment? Peace? So important? Or are you constantly comparing yourself with other people? Constantly? Or is there this sort of internal hypocrisy going on? I don't know. But I think it's really important, and it might indicate the source of wisdom that we're drawing from while we're producing fruit. You're producing fruit. But is it good fruit or is it bad fruit? Okay, any comments or anything? There's a lot there. We just did a bunch. Yes, sir.
I think it ties sort of back into the tongue too. And so much of what you bear as fruit comes out of your mouth. And I don't want to put him on blast, but I've told this before. I hope it isn't embarrassing. But Andy's one of the first people I think of because every time I talk to Andy, man, he wants to talk about something scriptural.
Come on.
And lovely, and it brings that out of me too. And there's so many other people here the same way. But he's just the first one. It's like I just know when I go to Eddie, I know it's on his mind because it's coming out of his mouth and it's all good fruits. And I just want to be that person. So it's just a great example.
Everybody be like Eddie. Thank you all.